Hi, it's Andy with another daily video. Today I'm going to talk about Romans chapter 5, verses 9 and 10. Now, as I briefly mentioned in my sermon, Paul uses some comparative statements in the 11 verses, Romans chapter 5, verses 1 through 11. And beginning in verse 3 is where we see this, and another similar use in verse 11. He uses the comparative phrase, more than that. So he's building something here. In verses 9 and 10, he uses much more shall, although in verse 10, the word shall is separated with a little bit of an explanation first. So let me read these two verses for us because Paul is addressing whether the God who has redeemed us can also sustain us in these two verses. In verse 9, since therefore we have now been justified by his blood, much more shall we be saved by him from the wrath of God. For if while we were enemies, we were reconciled to God by the death of his Son, much more now that we are reconciled, shall we be saved by his life. Paul is showing the Romans, he's building a lesser to a greater argument. And he's showing the Romans, and therefore us, that God saved us while we were sinful people, while we were apart from him, while we wanted nothing to do with God. He redeemed us from nothing. He justified us at his own doing. We were ungodly, we were sinful, but God made a way. He did not need to do so. He could have just left us for ourselves, but he chose to do so. And what Paul is saying is, if God was able to reach out and lift us from nothing, if God was able to change our ledger from being enemies of God to being children of God by the blood of Christ, even though we didn't have to do so, why wouldn't he save us? Why wouldn't he even want to save us from the wrath to come now that we are on his side, now that we are his children? Furthermore, it isn't just that he would want to save us from the wrath to come, but the wrath that we're talking about is his wrath. Why would God pour out his wrath on those he has already made an effort to save? And let us be certain it was an effort. The Son of God bore an agony of our sin. The Father watched the Son suffer in agony, and whatever the Spirit was doing in that moment, it was not a joyride for him either. So if we are to believe that God has the power to redeem us from destruction while we were at odds with him as the ungodly and as the sinners, we should have no problem believing that God has the power to sustain us once we are his. And if we know that to be true, we truly know the God who saves, the but God of the Bible. And that should give us plenty of hope to face whatever comes next.